How are you this morning?
I'm doing well, thank you.
In the drive-in?
It's beautiful.
Yeah. Very good.
Don't see snow on the corn very often. It's amazing. You don't want to, yes.
Well, I think we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome, Mr. Nierman, and you may begin with your opening comments.
Thank you very much. Just first of all, again, just extremely privileged to have my wife Lisa here with me today in the support of our amazing adult children. One of the hallmarks of my life has been to continually take on new challenges. And as I have applied this to my experience, education, and ethics, I am, by God's grace, ready to serve the people of Iowa on the Court of Appeals. My legal career began right after college when I started working in claims for the country's largest insurance company. By my mid-20s, I was supervising some attorneys and negotiating directly against others. I oversaw trials and depositions, detected insurance fraud, and wrote hundreds of thousands of dollars in checks. After 7 years, I looked for new challenges and enrolled at the University of Iowa College of Law. I finished the 3-year curriculum in 2 years and graduated with high distinction. Induction into the Order of the Coif followed. My practice experience has been expansive. Here's a sample of the hundreds of clients I've served. I represented Habitat for Humanity in multiple real estate and litigation matters. A couple who adopted two siblings in juvenile court after they were taken away from their biological parents because of abuse. A faithful wife whose husband gave her a venereal disease just before he walked out on her. A family man wrongly accused of a sex crime and vindicated at trial. A retiring couple selling the small business they had poured their lives into for decades. A teenager who was sent to juvenile court after he wrongly assumed that the girl that he met at a party was older than she really was. A college student who confronted his drinking problem after he was arrested. A heartbroken husband who, after receiving divorce papers, instructed me that no matter what the cost, I was not to take or do anything that would undermine his efforts at reconciliation. And a farm family with inadequate insurance preserved their ground after their teenage son loaned the family car to a drunk friend who caused a horrific accident. I've handled jury trials and appeals both as first chair and as sole chair. I've testified about 20 times, most of which as an expert witness. Additionally, I've completed numerous bench trials, arbitration, administrative law hearings, as well as domestic and international adoptions. Finally, I value and demonstrate a strong work ethic. In addition to the full-time practice of law, I've taken on additional challenges like leading a business, teaching at the law and undergraduate levels, and writing a college textbook. Earlier this month, I was on the ISU campus talking to hundreds of students about human trafficking law. And this Friday, I'm scheduled to speak at a similar seminar co-sponsored by the Iowa Law Enforcement Academy. I serve on 2 human trafficking task force and work with federal and state law enforcement officials. Generally, I'm one of the first at the office and one of the last to leave. I work almost every Saturday and through all but just a few holidays. Mindful of what I've done in the past, today I come before you looking forward. I don't intend on merely being a great judge. I expect to take on new challenges to further the rule of law and to help the judiciary fulfill, but not exceed, its essential role as one of 3 co-equal branches of government. I welcome your questions.
Well, thank you. And we do have some questions this morning. We will begin with Mr. Horbach.
I have no questions. Thank you.
Mr. Spies.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Nierman.
Good morning.
You and I have navigated the streets of Iowa City for many, many years together, and your application and your career as a lawyer and as a citizen demonstrate your big heart. Do you think that an appellate judge, or a judge for that matter, needs to surrender heart in applying the law, especially in an appellate proceeding?
I don't think a judge should surrender his or her heart. I do think that part of someone's heart is whether they uphold their promises. And the promise that I will take, if I'm so fortunate to serve on the Court of Appeals, will be to administer justice in accordance with the law. And the role of the judiciary is to apply the law. And that doesn't mean it's done in a heartless way, but it does mean that it's done in a way that's faithful to the law, realizing that some results might seem very counterintuitive, but that judges have to do their job and trust the other branches of government to do theirs as well, and to trust the citizens to take action if they find the results to be wrong.
Thanks.
Mr. Goodman, do you have a question?
Yes. Thank you very much for your application. As I read through the 11 applications, I got to the point where I thought every one of these people was highly qualified to serve in this position, and I felt like I was listening to the song Man's Earth Band, Blinded by the Light. It's hard to choose. And we've gone through a process of applications, interviews, and then we're going to go back as a group and select, and that selection is going to represent what 17 people together think, not 3 or 4 that pull the debate one way or the other. I think it helps to have one thing in our head about Craig Nierman and one thing in our head about every other applicant that describes them in a sentence or a short paragraph. What is the best way to characterize Craig Nierman as an applicant that distinguishes you from the other 10?
Sure. Well, I would, just reflect back on my opening statement. Experience, education, and ethics, and those as essential elements for a great judge. Someone who has an intellectual ability and desire to do the work, someone who has vast experience in a huge business and a very small business, handling just about every type of legal matter possible, and someone who is dedicated to upholding the highest standards of ethics. So those would be the 3 that I think they're most salient.
Thank you.
Mrs. Sinclair?
No questions.
Mr. Bevel?
No questions.
Ms. Stanger?
Thank you. Mr. Nierman, I've enjoyed getting to know you professionally and hearing about all of your great accomplishments, and it really resonates with me when you describe the work you do in terms of who your clients were. I'd like to know just personally a little bit more about you. What personal experience or event may have driven you to where you are today, or give some light about what you would bring to the Court of Appeals?
Yeah, 2 come to mind. One is the adoption work I've done. I have handled about 24 adoptions. Huge number of them have been international. The majority of them have been white Iowa couples adopting children of another race, many of them from Africa and South America. A couple of them had written to you. A lot of these people are our friends. We've gone to church with them. I've been in their homes. I've seen them love these kids with their whole heart, and it is just extraordinary. Some of them have incredible special needs. So that's one. Another, I think, is just the mentoring that I've engaged in, and this is not like, I've had associates in our law firm and have been privileged to mentor those. But what I was thinking about is people in law school, and inviting them into our homes and taking them to court with me, talking about ethical issues. Here, you're going to have a family and you're going to have a really demanding job. How are you going to deal with those things? And you and I have talked about leadership, and I think, a lot of times you exercise leadership when you are the official leader, and that's absolutely important. I think one of the most important aspects of a leader is what he or she does when they're not the official leader. Do they cast a compelling vision? Do they give direction? Do they give motivation? And that is something that not only should we be doing when we're not the official leader, but I think it's a great predictor of how that person will perform when they are called to be in leadership. And I mentioned those three, and I think motivation is the one that we often get wrong. There are a lot of talks about, here's how to give an inspiring speech to your followers, and that's great. But I think primarily it's leading by example. Are you willing to outwork everybody else? Will you commit to not taking ethical shortcuts? Are you taking appropriate risks? Are you learning from your mistakes? I think those are the things that really inspire people around you, and you do not need to be the official leader to exhibit those qualities.
Thank you.
Ms. Pearson?
Thank you for being with us today. You certainly have a service heart and are involved with many, many organizations. I would be interested in knowing, how did you happen to get involved with the Human Trafficking Coalition? That's such a huge issue in our country.
It was, I guess the overall answer is I was just convicted that I needed to do something. And, going to another country and rescuing people out of, homes or whatever, it's probably not what I'm best qualified to do. But I can talk about the law, and it's really amazing to me how many aspects of the law, just specifically regarding human trafficking, are not widely known among lawyers. And so this has been a great opportunity to talk to them and talk to students. I was speaking to business law classes at Iowa State. I mentioned that in my opening, and probably a lot of future lawyers in those classes. And so to inspire them to get thinking about this, if they go into law, how could they use the skill set that they're going to be given to help in this just really sad and important issue?
Thank you.
Ms. Law?
No questions, thank you.
Mr. Gray?
No, I have no question.
Mr. Bloom?
So in my past experiences, sometimes interviewing applicants, you try to ask them specific things that probably occur in everybody's careers, but nobody's proud of them, nobody's going to bring them up voluntarily. So in your experience as a litigator, have you had a time where you thought, for whatever reason, the relationship with opposing counsel got very terse, and that you overstepped your boundary, and what did you end up doing about it? Has that occurred, and how do you resolve it in your own mind?
Yeah, relationships with opposing counsel are really important, and you've received a few letters from people, or at least a couple that I've been opposing counsel with, and they have come to recommend me. Part of what happens is you've got clients who oftentimes just hate each other, right? And each one has a lawyer, and it's really important that these lawyers be able to talk to each other. And whether or not a settlement is in their best interests or not, to even talk about a settlement, you've got to have some trust. And usually it's not going to come here; it's got to come here. And even at trial, I had a trial recently where I found opposing counsel just very, very challenging to work with, and I felt it was my responsibility as a person to treat that person with just incredible kindness, and it was also in my client's best interest to do that. And I absolutely have seen attorneys do things that were really frustrating to me, felt like just incredibly unfair to my client, and I've been rude, absolutely. But that's not something I'm proud of, and it's not appropriate.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Conover?
No questions, thank you.
Mr. Suka?
No questions.
Ms. O'Brien?
Well, I continue to admire your work on in insurance and ERISA and so on. In what seems like it could be a very dry area, the human factor really shines. Could you tell us about your favorite case in that area?
Well, I've talked before about the case where I helped a client obtain life-saving surgery, and that's certainly one that stands out. I think part of being an advocate is that you do absolutely everything ethically and creatively that you can to help a client. And, sometimes you win and sometimes you don't. And I think when you don't, you realize that we have a system, and it's one that we absolutely have to respect. It's the one that has, in essence, been created by the people through their elected representatives. And, we absolutely need insurance. It's sometimes, for most people, they end up paying more in than they get out. But we pay a premium, figuratively and literally, so that if we are that, 1 out of 1,000 whose house is blown down by a tornado, that we have some peace of mind. And so I think, and insurance has been a great place to specialize because it touches every other aspect of the law. In May I was testifying in a securities litigation case that had a large insurance component. So it's given me an opportunity to see a lot of different areas of the law that I wouldn't have seen otherwise.
Mr. Berger?
No questions?
Ms. Valentine?
Thank you. Going back to your work on the adoptions, how would that work impact your view of litigants, the parties before you on the bench?
I'm sorry, how would that impact?
Your view. How would that impact how you deal with litigants that come before you?
I think there's sometimes a temptation to think that the Supreme Court handles the important cases, and the Court of Appeals handles all the others. The important case is the one that you're a litigant in, and I think through despite the briefs and precedent and so forth, and these are people. And, even one side has to lose at the appellate level. And so I think it's really important for judges to write opinions so that people know that even though they didn't prevail, that their case was considered carefully. Their case was important. And to give them that information in a way that's incredibly respectful and show the depth of the law and why it had to be this way. And again, I think this helps point people back to having trust in the courts, that they are just applying the law, and that if they don't like the result, then they need to go to the other branches of law to change that.
Thank you.
Mr. Hoytig?
Well, Mr. Goodman kind of took my question, although much more eloquently stated it. But
The Manfred part.
Pardon me?
Never mind.
But I will ask, we heard from another candidate today out of your judicial district, and there's a chance that your judicial district would be unrepresented geographically if an appointment's not made out of there. What do you think, what role should geography play, and why do you think that's important?
Before we get to geography, I think we need two things. One is we need great judges. And it doesn't matter whether your case is from Lyon County in the northwest or Lee County in the southeast. We need judges with great intellectual firepower. We need judges with excellence and so forth. The other thing we need, and this I think more directly addresses what you're talking about, is we need judges that understand the breadth of the state of Iowa. So in other words, what we don't need is 9 judges, even if they're perfectly apportioned across the state, who are only familiar with their communities. I've had a statewide practice. I was in Sioux City a couple months ago. I represented a family from a small town in western Iowa for years on an ongoing insurance case. I've had multiple cases in Polk County. I have 2 here right now. I understand what it's like, just how hard it is just to get a trial date here. I remember a very cold February day in one of Iowa's smallest and poorest counties. The courtroom was so cold that the judge literally stopped the proceedings every 15 to 20 minutes just so the court reporter could warm up her hands, because she couldn't keep going otherwise. I've driven up to the family farm and sat around the kitchen table and talked about hard things. I've heard the stories of the urban poor in Iowa. I have a perspective I bring a perspective of knowing huge portions of the state. I think I've represented people or appeared in roughly 2/3 of Iowa's counties. And it's really important to have that because the vast majority of the cases that I would be dealing with are not going to come from the 6th District. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nierman, for being here. We are out of time, but we certainly appreciate your application and wish you well.
Yes,
thank you.
Thank you all.
And thank you for bringing your wife with you.
That is my pleasure.